Welcome, everybody. We're here today with the author Anthony Peake, who has written about 12 books. Is that correct?
It is, yeah.
Wow.
Good for you.
Out of Body Experience, The Hidden Universe, Cheating the Ferryman is the most recent. And definitely there seem to be some basic themes and ideas that repeat over and over in your books. Maybe we could start. Just tell us a little bit about yourself. What kind of like your professional background is, how you got into this stuff, and
Yeah, sure. Originally from Liverpool, Merseyside. Moved away many years ago, early 1970s, to go to university. Did my first degree at Warwick University and then a postgrad at the London School of Economics. But all the time, I've been very much interested in extraordinary human experiences. Ever since I was a child, because way back in 1966, I had double pneumonia. And during the crisis of pneumonia, I had a series of extraordinary hallucinations, which even as a 12-year-old fascinated me as to what was taking place here. I was seeing things in my external visual field that my brain was generating, or supposedly was. And I then became very interested in the occult. And I followed up with a British part series magazine called Man, Myth and Magic, which I really enjoyed reading as a kid. And when I got a place at university, I decided I was going to study sociology, in particular the sociology of religion, the sociology of belief. And that gave me the opportunity to do a lot of research work into New Age religious movements, these kind of things as well. But when I did my postgrad, it was in business. And I then started a business career, which I continued until probably 1998, 99. And at that time, I'd always wanted to write a book. And my wife was very accommodating. And she said, look, if you really want to do this, you've just finished a fairly lucrative business contract. Take a year out and just write a book. And that's literally what I did. And, as most writers will know, you start writing your book and you've got that blank screen and you think, oh, right, okay, what am I going to write about? And I decided that I was interested in various subjects, but I wasn't sure where to go. And what happened was I started developing pre-migraine aura. The aura state is when you have classic migraine, you have warnings that you're about to have a migraine attack. Mm-hmm. And this was a particularly profound one. And I was having incredible deja vu sensations. So when I came out of the aura state, I decided that's what I wanted to write about, was deja vu. And I started researching all I could about the deja vu state, that feeling that you've lived something before, that you're re-experiencing something. And I came across the work of an American researcher called Dr. Arthur Funkhauser, who's a Jungian analyst and a quantum physicist. So he's an interesting guy. And some of the things he said about deja vu really fascinated me. And then I made links with deja vu and near-death experiences and the neurochemical correlates of near-death experiences, deja vu, migraine. And my first book came out of that. And in the end, how? Right. Well, what I was interested in.
She said, wow.
I said, wow. Well, I wanted to add.
Wow.
Right. Like, I love where that led. What did he say specifically? What did he say about deja vu? What was like his top 2 gems about deja vu that you were like, oh, fuck?
Wow. Okay. The really good thing that Art is called the dream theory of deja vu. And in the dream theory, he proposes that the sense of recognition that we have during a deja vu sensation is because we are re-experiencing something, and we're re-experiencing a dream. So effectively, we all have precognitive dreams. And what happens is, like with all dreams, you forget that you've had a dream. So what will happen is there'll be a recognition set of circumstances in your normal waking life, which you'll remember from an indeterminate part of your past. Now, the classic definition of deja vu is the thing put together by, again, an American psychiatrist called Vernon Neppe, who's based in Seattle. And Neppe's definition is that it is a memory from a part of your past that you can't remember. So it's an indefined part of your past. Now, what Art argued was that, in fact, what is taking place is you're remembering a dream. But when Art and I met, and we've now worked together on many occasions, I pointed out to Art, but of course that suggests precognition, because if you are if you have dreamt something before it's happened, that's a precognitive dream.
Right.
And both Art and I are both fascinated by the writings of a Anglo-Irish aeronautical engineer called John William Dunn, who wrote an amazing book in 1928 called An Experiment with Time. And again, Dunn argued that we all have precognitive dreams. And when you wake up in the morning, you should write down your dreams immediately, because you'll find the vast majority of them will have elements of the future. Now, for me, this was very interesting, particularly because Art told me that there's another term better than deja vu called deja vécu, which is already lived. Ooh. And I then thought, well, how does this link in with near-death experiences? How does it link in with the other things I was reading up about? And I suddenly thought to myself, there is a linkage here. Because one of the moody traits in near-death experiences, there is a series of traits that physicians use to define when somebody's had a near-death experience, and they're called the moody traits, named after Raymond Moody, who was the guy that wrote the original book on, I think it was called Life After Life. Now, one of the moody traits is something called a panoramic life review. Mm-hmm. And the panoramic life review is that term you've heard people say many, many times, I saw my life flash before my eyes. Now, I thought, now this is intriguing. So if at the point of death, you see your life flash before your eyes, what's taking place here? Where are the memories coming from? Where is the imagery coming from? But more importantly, can this be linked to other neurological phenomena? And lo and behold, I discovered that it can be, because there is a linkage between the release of certain neurochemicals in the brain during a near-death experience and the release of neurochemicals in the brain during temporal lobe epilepsy, temporal lobe seizures, the issues that I was talking about with my own migraine. So there's a linkage here. But on top of that, I also thought, well, if your life flashes before your eyes, is there another factor that can be brought in here? And one of the other moody traits is time dilation. People say that when they have a near-death experience, time seems to expand. It gets wider and wider, and it takes much longer. And what I argue in my first book, the concept of Cheating the Ferryman, which I first presented in this book, when in fact I first presented the book in a peer-reviewed academic paper that was published in the winter of 2005 edition of the International Association of Near-Death Studies academic journal. But what I suggest is that at the point of death, what actually happens is we go into a time dilation state. So in the final microseconds of your life, you go into this micro state of time dilation. And when you do, the panoramic life review that in a near-death experience flashes by doesn't. You effectively drop into a virtual reality computer game version, third-person computer game version of your own life. And in that life, you can follow all the options that you wish to do so. Now, on top of that, I argue that at the point of death, something else curious happens. And I argue that human consciousness splits into two separate identifiable areas. I call this the eidolon and the Damon. The eidolon is the everyday consciousness that just exists in one life and then dies. It's like an on-screen sprite.
Anthony, you're not the kind of guy that one has to ask a lot of questions to.
Yeah, no, fine. Fire away.
Well, the options. You said the options. When you're in this, when you actually die, what options are we talking about? Because one thing that I've heard a lot from, and this is from regressions a lot of times, but also like mediums, like Laurel and Jackson is a medium that I've read a lot of books on, and I've noticed certain consistencies. One of them is when you die, you experience how you've made everybody feel in that life.
Yeah.
So you get to be in that seat, and it's not a shamey thing. It's not a, you did that. It's a, this is how we affect each other in ways that you didn't even know. When you said you can follow the options of when you get this, like your life is flashing, but you're in this more of a sit-down theater vibe, what kind of options? Like you can kind of explore certain memories?
Well, no. What happens, I would argue, is let's use the analogy of a third person virtual reality computer game. I use the analogy of Lara Croft in Tomb Raider because that's what I used to play when I was younger. Okay, so the game starts, and encoded within the CD-ROM or encoded within the gameplay that's digitized is the outcome of every decision that the game player can make with their on-screen sprite. So imagine a scenario that there's a game of your life. And again, in the books, I mean, this sounds really crazy, but I do the science of this. All this is backed by academic research.
Yeah.
And in my books, I give you the references to the academic research. But the idea is that when you're dying, you split into two, and the Damon is your game player. The Damon is the real you. It's the immortal you.
Your soul. Would you argue?
It's like your soul. It's like also your spirit guide.
Ooh, okay.
Do you know people say they have spirit guides?
Oh, yeah.
Spirit guides guide them and warn them. And we have warnings in life. You meet somebody and something tells you there's something wrong with this person, or you meet somebody else and you think, my God, I'm in love with you, and I don't know why.
Yep.
I argue that this is because this is Damon memory. This is your Damon speaking to you. Now, I've got my second book, The Damon, A Guide to Your Extraordinary Secret Self. I give the science of this. I give through the neurology. I use the evidence for split brain operations.
You have that in the Ferryman book.
Yeah, I do. Yeah. I do indeed.
But I mean, I want to just sort of pedal back a little bit because I mean, for me, it's like, there are a lot of different ideas and arguments around, what happens if anything happens after we die. And, on the one hand, you have a lot of analysis looking at quantum physics and looking at, a range, some range of experiences that have been reported, in studies of epilepsy and so on. So for me, there was two, kind of areas. One was a huge amount of kind of like scholarship and so on. And then there was actually your conclusions. And personally, just to be honest, I was super impressed with your scholarship and the amount of, kind of like vitality you've put into kind of understanding Eastern mysticism and quantum physics. I wasn't as convinced by your particular kind of Groundhog Day, Edge of Tomorrow kind of solution. I thought it was intriguing. But for me, I'm also I feel this sort of like that we have to be very careful, particularly if we live in this sort of quantum reality. We might actually be kind of reifying our future post-life experience. If we define something, we might actually be closing ourselves in some ways. I thought it'd be interesting to just sort of slow down a little bit and maybe talk about what do you think is some of the best evidence that there is. Most scientific materialist people would say, the evidence is really not good, that anything happens after we die, that, basically consciousness is, more or less, a kind of epiphenomenon of the sort of meat. And once the meat is cooked, so the brain is gone,
Yeah, I find that such a narrow, the eliminative materialist viewpoint. The viewpoint of the Churchlands and people like Daniel Dennett, the idea that consciousness is literally just you bring together certain things and consciousness just spontaneously appears within the brain. And I've argued over the past, where does, is it just the addition of one quark? Is it the addition of one electron? How does this happen? Where does this consciousness just come from? This is not the same as saying that, you put hydrogen and oxygen together and you create the wetness of water. It's quite a different thing. And of course, the arguments put forward by people like, I don't know, for example, let's see, the hard problem of consciousness of Chalmers. The idea of we are not in at first base understanding how the brain creates consciousness. So then we leap on from there to say, well, okay, let's assume that consciousness is just an epiphenomenon of brain processes. In which case, we then have what evidence do we have that something happens at the point of death? Well, there's been two fascinating discoveries made in recent years. The first one, I think, was in about 2017. And there's a Japanese-American researcher called Jimo Borjigin, who's based at the University of Michigan. And she was doing a series of experiments with rats. And what they discovered is extraordinary. They found that when the rats were dying, the brain suddenly exploded into action. In the final seconds of the rat's dying, the brain came alive. And there was as if different parts of the brain were firing simultaneously, as if non-local actions were taking place in the brain. And this fascinated Borjigin and her associates because they thought, well, this, for want of a better term, could be a near-death experience taking place here. We're almost measuring and seeing the brain actions of a near-death experience.
Well, this is a little bit like the Rick Strassman theory that you'd have a flood of dimethyltryptamine right at the last moment.
I'm totally with Rick on that. Not only that, but I'd argue that it's even more subtle than that. And I'd suggest that probably the link could be the pineal gland synthesizing from melatonin, synthesizing what some associates of Rick has called metatonin, which is endogenous DMT. And it's the release of the endogenous DMT that brings about the near-death experience. Now, not only this, but it is intriguing to think about this because there's a linkage also with glutamate, the neurotransmitter glutamate, at the point of death as well. And glutamate is also the major action in terms of temporal lobe epilepsy and various other things. But the other fascinating experiment, which wasn't an experiment, it's something that happened quite by chance. And it happened, I think it was 2020 or 2021. And what happened was there was an elderly guy in Germany, I think it was, and he had fallen and he damaged himself. He'd either broken his leg or something. And they were working with him and they had an EEG on his brain as he went into cardiac arrest. And for the first time ever, he died. So the first time ever, they were able to measure the brain activity in a dying human being. Wow. And exactly the same thing that happened with Borjigin rats took place with this guy, where suddenly his brain suddenly fired everywhere, again with this massive release of energy and information that seemed to be that the brain was creating something. And I argue this is the creation of the simulation.
But these can't be your best. I mean, those are very particular and very recent kind of cases or whatever. This can't be your best argument for the existence of some type of consciousness after death.
No, because my consciousness doesn't necessarily say it's after death. And this is one of the things that people always misinterpret with my work.
Okay.
If you look very carefully at what I'm saying, everything that I say happens in a live brain. The person hasn't died yet. Right. The issue is time. The issue is, and I address this in my book, The Labyrinth of Time, that time is the only thing that we measure by itself. You can have a pound of apples, you can have weights of things, but you can only have a minute of a minute. And I don't know whether my minute is equivalent to your minute because it's clock time. We're confusing sort of distance of a hand moving round a clock.
I was enjoying Christina is definitely tripping out on this concept.
There's smoke coming out of my ears. Well, I've heard a lot of mediums say that time doesn't exist on the other side. I've heard that said so many times, and I'm really fascinated by that concept because the only time that human beings get to experience time not really existing is one, in sleep, and then two, when you're in a creative flow. The most beautiful part about being in a creative flow is time does not exist, and it's so beautiful, and it's really hard to wrap your head around time not existing, but I just know that that's true. I can't understand it, but I'm like, that's gotta be, there's something to that.
Well, it's very intriguing, this. A few years ago, I wrote a biography of the American science fiction writer Philip K. Dick, and Philip K. Dick had a concept he called orthogonal time. And orthogonal time is very, very similar to the J.W. Dunn concept of serial time that Dunn was using in the late 1920s, early 1930s. And it's the idea that there is a time that runs at right angles to this time. So every nodal point of time on linear time, there is another time that runs at a right angle to it. And that's the timeless zone that people talk about. And the person you really need to read about this is an English mathematician called Julian Barber.
Okay.
And Julian Barber in 2001, I think it was, wrote a fascinating book called The End of Time. And in my new book, I cite the work of Barber. And the idea is that time is not what we think it is. As St. Augustine said, I spend all my time trying to understand what time is. And if I don't think about it, I understand it. But the minute I start to focus in on it, I start to get lost and confused. And it's because, as Einstein said, time is an illusion, but it's a very, very persistent one.
That
because
we
we confuse
to.
time. Pardon?
We all agreed to time, though. We all agreed to this illusion. We agreed to meet at 1 p.m.
No, I
we
disagree.
Agreed.
I
mean, our society-wise, like we plan.
Well,
things.
what we're doing here is we're confusing entropy and the idea of things changing from order to disorder. And this is what scientists will call time. But when we start to think very, very distinctly about what exactly is time, we start to get into some very interesting areas. For instance, is time quantized like matter is, or energy? Is there a quanta of time? And Daniel Finkelstein, who was an American researcher, once jokingly called it the chronon, and the idea that there is a particle of time. And there's more research going this way to say that time is quantized. Now, if time is quantized, it begs some very fascinating questions, because it means that time is made up of unique bits, but there is bits between the bits, just like there are between quantum particles. And what is that? Because if it's not time, what is it? Because, and this is where it becomes very, very peculiar and strange. And your point about, and I will guarantee a lot of your listeners will agree with this, we've all had those experiences, haven't we, where suddenly we're bigger than bad news, or we're in a car crash and time seems to go zzz, and it slows down. Now, how can that be? How can time slow down for some people and not for others? And its central part of my argument is that at the point of death, time slows down for the dying person, whereas the observers are in what we could call consensual time. But for the dying person, they move into a totally different time zone. And their final seconds could last a month or a year. And I'll give an example of this, because one of my associates many years ago contacted me because she had been diagnosed with temporal lobe epilepsy.
Oh, wow.
And how she discovered she had it was that she had this most extraordinary experience where she had been at a business meeting and she'd been in conversation with a friend of hers, and they both had cups of tea. And the friend was about to pour a cup of tea to my, we'll call her Margaret. That's not her name. We'll call her Margaret. And as the lady was pouring the tea, Margaret felt a snap over her ear, and her friend had stopped moving. And she looked around, and all she could hear was this low humming noise. And her friend had stopped moving, and everybody in the restaurant had stopped moving. Now, movie buffs will say, yeah, this happened in Vanilla Sky. There's a section in the movie Vanilla Sky where the guy turns around and says, shut the fuck up. David Ames has this character who is actually Damon, funnily enough. And everything stops and freezes. Now, this is what happened to this lady. Now, what she then realized was that the friend was actually moving incredibly slowly, and she watched as the tea came out of the spout, and she saw the surface tension of the water bounce up as the tea as it came down. And then she realized that the humming sound was in fact people's voices. Wow. And she turned around to me and she said, do you know, I could have been there. I don't know how long I was there. She said it could have been days, it could have been weeks, it could have been a lifetime. But as far as, and then there was a snap over her head and her friend started moving again. So as far as her friend's point of view, literally she'd just gone into petty malabsence. She'd literally just stared at her for a split second and blinked. But for the subjective point of view of the woman, Margaret, she'd been away for hours, weeks, years.
Yeah, no, and definitely psychedelics can give you that sense of time being very dilated and so on.
And you've experienced that, have you, Dan? I guess you have many times.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and I would say the times that I've done mushrooms, like more extreme mushroom trips, it is this feeling of, you feel like you're existing in water. You do feel like time is slowing down, and it's interesting. I know we were talking a little bit about ETs and aliens earlier, and I mentioned, I've been watching a lot of videos of Dolores Cannon who's done thousands of regressions on people who claim to have been abducted, and one of the things that they said that was pretty consistent across our clients was that if an alien to come down here, a lot of times they stop time, take you up, do an experiment, do whatever, and then put you back down, and then time continues on again. And so, like, the manipulation of space and time seemed to have been a big part, a big characteristic of abductions.
Totally. I mean, very much. Jenny Randalls, the UK researcher, calls it the Oz factor. And it's this idea of lost time. And I've come across many cases that I researched in my book on time, of time slips, lost time. A friend of mine, him and his friend were driving along the road one day, and they decided to go to a local pub, and they went into the local pub and they looked at the clock, and they'd been away for 3 hours.
Wow.
And as far as they were concerned, a couple of seconds.
I want to just back up again, because I'm trying to get to you're very good at going deep into these detailed.
I shouldn't, should I?
well, no, it's all interesting, but I guess I want to just understand, first of all. So, there's a lot of different ideas in different cultures about, assuming there is an afterlife, how it functions, what happens. I mean, you have the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which talks about how we're reincarnated into these different Bardo realms. And actually, it's very good to be reincarnated into the human realm, because that's the only realm where potentially you could have realization or, reach a state of, enlightenment, and you don't have to keep going back to the wheel over and over again. You have, obviously, the Christian view of a heaven and a hell. The Greek view, which your title kind of plays upon, where there's Charon and the river Styx and Hades, where the sort of souls still have physical form, but they're not very embodied or very interesting in a way. Or they have some kind of subtle form, but they're not really, they're shades, I guess is the word they use.
Yeah.
And then your idea is very particular, which is that, it sort of relates to the Nietzsche idea of the eternal return, that when we die, we have these two parts of our psyche, the eidolon and the daimon. And the daimon is like the higher part of our self, in a way, like the soul that kind of knows, that doesn't exist in this kind of a chronological time, that exists in some kind of other time. And the eidolon is the individual subjectivity side of ourself. And when we end one life, we go into this time dilation where we review the life experience that we've had, and then we actually live again. We go through the same life with slightly different opportunities, or the possibility to correct past mistakes. I mean, how did you arrive at this, of all possible views, and why do you consider this to be more of a reasonable kind of viewpoint than, let's say, the Bardo idea or reincarnation, which it seems like there's a lot of really great evidence for, if you look at even Stevenson work of where biology and reincarnation intersect and so on?
Okay, well, the first thing I'd say is that probably the nearest afterlife model to mine is, in fact, the Bardo state. Because if you read the Tibetan Book of the Dead, you will know that there is this whole universe that the dying soul exists in before they really die. And this is profoundly important. It's the idea that the Bardo state is literally my Cheating the Ferryman hypothesis. And in that Bardo state, you are in a position whereby you can live your life again. You can live other people's lives. Indeed, you will feel the feelings that you've given to other people as well. And again,
well, these are all Bardos. I mean, the human Bardo, the animal Bardo, the hungry ghosts realm. Aren't they? They're all Bardos. I mean, just for people who don't know, maybe it's worth just kind of like saying, I don't know if you've ever read the Tibetan Book of the Dead.
I have, yeah.
Yeah. So it's basically the idea that when you die, there's this kind of opportunity. There's like the clear light of nirvana, but although it's attractive, it's also kind of terrifying because it completely annihilates your subjective identity in a way. So people tend to veer away from it, and as soon as you veer away from the clear light, then there are these other colors, and you get attracted to the colors, and the colors represent these doorways into these other worlds. And so then based on the predominant kind of emotions. I mean, in a way, they talk about how, because every bardo is based on an emotion, has a dominant emotion to it, and based on how you've lived your life, there's an emotion that predominates that's going to lead you into like maybe the demigod realm, I think, is envy. The god realm, I can't remember exactly, maybe it's like laziness or lassitude or something. Like you have all this time, you can have an orgasm that lasts like 10,000 years or whatever. Yeah. But at the end, you haven't done anything to increase your karma. So then you go back to being an insect or a hungry ghost or whatever. So yeah, so in between life, you have this opportunity to either opt out of the wheel altogether if you're ready for nirvana. Yeah. Well, I think you talk about Tony in your book that there's something for you there, like there's like a spiritual existence in nirvana, like an individuated experience. But then otherwise you reincarnate in this sort of cyclical matrix. So Tony's perspective. Yeah. Go ahead.
I was going to say, because what I would suggest there is that it's rather like the movie Groundhog Day, as you've mentioned, because what happens is that Connors in Groundhog Day lives the same day over and over again, but he changes it every time and he uses it to his own advantage. So what is happening, I would argue, is that like in my model, and remember, it's just a model. I don't know whether it's right. I don't know whether it's wrong. What happened with the model that I developed was that this is what the science and this is what the experience was telling me was taking place. I didn't start and think, this is a great idea. Let's go and try and find the information for it and the support for it. It was quite the opposite. I didn't know where I was going. So it's a very important point. I didn't write my books to say because I had this great idea or an idea. It wasn't. It was the information I was being given by temporal lobe epileptics, by migraineurs, by near-death experiences, and individuals who had come to me who had the most extraordinary near-death experiences.
What's the most extraordinary near-death experience you've heard about?
Wow, I suppose my favorite is a friend of mine, and it's an extraordinary story, and he contacted me about this. Back in 1999, a guy called Bill Murtha, and he was cycling along a seawall in the south of England, in Devon. And he was cycling along the seawall, and it was early March, similar time of year to now. And as he was cycling on the seawall, a wave came up over the seawall and knocked him off his bike. Wow. He then tried to pick up the bike, and another wave came over, washed him into the estuary of the River Exe in a place called Dawlish. He landed in the water and started to try and swam because he was quite a strong swimmer, but he suddenly realized that he'd fallen into the sea. The tide was going out. Was it going out? Might have been going out. And the problem was that the seawall was so high, there was no way he could climb above it. And he started to die of hypothermia. And as he was dying of hypothermia, he suddenly had this amazing sensation, and people have reported about this a lot of times. It's called the oceanic effect. He suddenly felt that he was the seagulls above him, and he was the cliffs around him, and he was the water around him. Wow. Then suddenly this voice manifests in him and says, you've got to change your life. You're on the wrong path. And then suddenly he explained to me, suddenly there was a snap, and he's running. He's running across a street in the East End of London, and he realizes he's in his child's body when he was a child, and he looks up to see a car coming towards him, and the car hits him, and he feels the pain of his leg being broken, and suddenly he's out of his body, and suddenly he's looking down at a woman's leg. And she's got a ladder in her stocking, and she's fiddling with her fingers with the ladder in the stocking. And then she looks up, and he realizes she's holding a steering wheel, and she's in a car. And as she looks up, a kid runs across in front of them, and it's him. Yeah. And he hits her. She hits him, and then she gets out the car, and he sensed all the horror that she had of injuring him. Then he's out of his body again. And he told me he was like a point of consciousness looking down the hallway of his house. And there's a knock on the door, and he sees his two daughters and his wife go to the door, and they open the door, and there's a police officer. And the policeman says, terrible news, we found your husband's body. He's drowned in the sea off Dawlish. He's back out of his body again. back in the water, dying of hypothermia. Then the voice starts talking to him and says, you really need to change. I'm you guiding you. I'm with you all the time, but you've got to change. Now, I haven't got time to explain how he was saved, but he was, and that's an unbelievable story. How he was saved. Well, I'll tell you the story how he was saved. It's incredible. In Dawlish, there's a pub, and the guy who owned the pub was interested in astronomy, and one of the people that used to regularly come in the pub had an astronomical telescope, and this guy turned around and said to him, "Can I borrow your telescope?" And the guy said, "Yes, I'll bring it round in the next couple of days." Brings it round, and he left the telescope in the top part of his house in the pub, overlooking the bay. The particular evening that my friend was in the water, this guy decides to go upstairs for some reason to look at the stars. He's looking at the stars, and as he's looking, the sky's not that good, so he decides not to do so. He walks past the telescope on the tripod, and as he does, he knocks it, and the telescope angle changed to be looking at the Earth. Mm-hmm. He's walking out through the door, and suddenly a voice in this guy's head turns around and says, "Go back and look through the telescope." Yeah. He finds himself going back to look through the telescope, to see through the lens Bill in the water.
Wow.
And he goes, "My God, there's a guy out in the water." So they go actually down. He calls out the people, and they drag Bill in. Wow. And they broke his collarbone as they tried to pull him in. Wow. So he had been saved by the most amazing set of circumstances. Yeah. And he's written a book on this. It's called Dying to Live.
That's cool.
Because he changed his lifestyle and everything. So that to me was an extraordinary near-death experience.
So Anthony, I'm noticing. I was going to bring up in the Cheating the Ferryman book. You talk about there is something not quite right about reality as it is revealing itself to our science. All the evidence points to a conclusion that in some very profound way, the universe and everything in it is part of a greater reality. Not only that, but what we perceive to be our reality seems to have been designed. This does not mean that there is a creator God as such, but it does suggest that we exist in a universe that is programmed. Can you explain that a little bit, how you arrived at that kind of conclusion?
Yeah, it's an application of something that's been doing the rounds in certain scientific circles for quite a long time, and it's called the cosmic anthropic principle. And it's the idea that if you look, there's only two, well, firstly, if you assume that there's only ever been one universe, this one universe has been fine-tuned since the first moments of the Big Bang to allow the evolution of sentient consciousness, observer consciousnesses. And there's a whole series of these. It's actually called the Goldilocks enigma. It's so precise. And the balance of, even in the first moments of the Big Bang, the balance between matter and antimatter, there had to be slightly more matter than antimatter. Otherwise, they'd have destroyed themselves. But it moves on even little things like water. Water is essential to the existence of life. And yet water is a very, very peculiar liquid. It's the only one that freezes from the top downwards. Every other liquid freezes from the bottom upwards, which means that water will never freeze solid within the Goldilocks zone of planet Earth. Now, a guy called Freeman Dyson first came up with this idea, and then various other physicists and cosmologists started to notice this. So there's only one of two options. Either the universe is fine-tuned for the evolution of sentient life, or this is one of trillions of universes, which is the ever its many worlds interpretation, which suggests that there are trillions of universes, and we just happen to be in one of them, that the ideal situation developed in the right way. But there is more to this, because the latest research is starting to discover that this universe is holographic in nature, and it's digital. And it is to do with how black holes function, and it's to do with how information is stored. And it seems to be that it's programmed in some way. of course, I'm using our terminology because we don't have any other way of doing it.
This sounds very much like the simulation hypothesis of Nick Bostrom.
It is, yes. Yeah. It is.
So is that
very much? I mean,
is that where you're is that where you kind of plant your flag at this point? You feel that that's probably something along those lines is probably accurate?
There is more and more evidence to suggest that it is, and I mean the work that's being done at the moment by Craig Hogan to the Perimeter Institute in Ontario, where they're looking for the pixelation of space at the moment. It's very, very interesting. There was some very strange results they got on something.
If we're living in a simulation, then kind of like a computer program, if you got to the very smallest, micro, it would pixelate out.
Ooh, cool.
You find that cool? I find that would be very disappointing to discover the pixels.
Yeah, the implications of that would be a little hard to wrap your head around, but woo!
Well, of course, the first implication is, well, who designed it?
Yeah, I think our higher selves, our daemons.
Yeah, well, it could be. There is the fascinating point of view as well. Of course, that the act of observation or the act of measurement collapses subatomic particles into point physical particles. Before a subatomic particle is observed or measured, it's literally a statistical wave. Right. It doesn't have any existence. It's only when it is measured or observed, that statistical wave, which means that the particle could be anywhere in a particular location.
So you're talking about like an electron, for instance, isn't really made of anything but a mathematical kind of like equation in a way.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing that a lot of people misunderstand. Photons, the things that we see, which are technically bosons, these are carriers of the electromagnetic message. They're point particles. And people never really think what a point particle is. It literally is a point. However much you look at it, it's always only going to ever be a point particle. Now, on top of this, photons, because of their nature, only ever travel at the speed of light and have infinite mass. So they have infinite mass, which means they don't exist in three-dimensional space. They travel at the speed of light, and traveling at the speed of light, time stops. So from the point of view of a photon, there is no time.
Jeez.
So the photons by which you are looking around you now, and of course how you see is photons hitting your retina and being converted into electrical signals which go to the darkest part of your brain and create this three-dimensional visual image.
Anthony, we're not going to need to take any DMT after talking to you. We're just going to be in that state all the time.
This conversation is a psychedelic.
Are you ever afraid?
I'd love to think I am the DMT.
Are you ever afraid that you're just going to think too deeply about these things and you won't be able to get back to normal reality? You'll just go insane.
I used to do a regular program every 2 weeks on the BBC, on BBC Radio Merseyside. And the guy that used to interview me used to say that a lot. He said, "How do you sleep at night?"
Yeah.
And I do. I just love ideas. I just love spinning around with ideas. And, as you know, I'm fascinated in the implications of DMT, what DMT entities are, when people see entities, and a couple of my friends are involved in the research project at Imperial College at the moment. And some of the things they're telling me, the things they're finding is just extraordinary.
Yeah, we're interviewing another person soon, in fact, right after you in chronological time, who has been doing the Imperial College. He's one of the test subjects, Alexander Biener. Do you know his work?
Oh, right.
Yeah.
I don't know him. Yeah. I do know that the test subject I know is a guy called Carl Hayden Smith.
Yeah, of course. Carl's a friend.
You probably know Carl.
Yeah, he's a buddy, yeah.
And of course, the work that's being done by another mutual friend of ours, oh God, I can't forget his name now. Oh, my brain's going.
Well,
go ahead.
I do have. I can't. It's 2:03, so I know we have like 12 minutes with you, and I can't leave without asking you this one question. So through all of this deep diving that I've done, I'm a stand-up comedian. I'm in the entertainment industry. I'm just fucking fascinated with how powerful every human being is, and how we don't. I'm like, you guys, we're all sleeping on this. We're all sleeping. You are so much more powerful than you could ever know. And I don't want to wait until I die from this life to really experience that. So my question for you is, are there ways to induce these incredible states of time stopping, of deja vu, without a psychedelic? Like, how do we conjure up these abilities or these powers?
Without a car crash also.
Right. I don't want a car crash. I don't want to drown and wait for some guy to spot me in a telescope to save me. Like, can we have these extraordinary experiences without almost dying?
Well, I would like to believe so. And one of the groups I've been working with for the last 10 years are two Austrian researchers, Dirk Prokol and Engelbert Winkler. Dirk Prokol is a consultant neurologist, and Engelbert Winkler is a consultant psychologist. And they've developed something they call the hypnagogic light experience, hypnagogic light device. Now, I'm negotiating at the moment with the distributors in America to have one of these machines with me when I do my events in Indian Wells in the summer. This machine is extraordinary, I have to say. It is almost like, the Brian Geisen light machine and everything else. It's a little bit like that, but because it's been designed by professionals, it brings about altered states of consciousness very, very quickly.
Wow.
And I'm working with others because we're thinking of trying to find ways of using this machine in such a way that we can then start testing. David Luke was the guy I was talking about before, by the way,
yeah,
Dan. And David Luke and I were involved in an event we did at Drakelow Caves 2.5 years ago, where we again put people into light hypnotic states using both virtual reality and the hypnagogic light device to try and recreate Plato's cave.
Okay.
And the altered states of consciousness to do with the Eleusinian mysteries. Now, I think that there are ways of doing this. Now, for instance, there is a New York psychiatrist called, I think it's Schaefer, and he's come up with a way of hypnotizing people while they've blocked out the dominant hemisphere of the brain by blocking out the peripheral visual fields of both eyes. Now, there must be other ways we can do this, that we can actually open up direct communication with the daemon, in which case we can access the wider information field that the daemon has. It's what I call the Bohmian IMAX. It's the kind of the information field that sits below this information field. And if we can do that, we can start opening channels, I think, without the use of entheogens. It's just a matter of time when we can do this. And this is why, Dan, your work and your books, You're Breaking Open the Head, I thought was an extraordinary piece of work.
Thank you.
And it very much, I remember reading that book, nodding all the time, going, this is great. It was your book and The Cosmic Serpent, Jeremy Narby. Both your books, really started pointing me in the direction of the route I've been taking. So can I thank you for that now?
No, it's so sweet.
So it's how we do this together. And I believe that we are all, I genuinely believe that all our daemons are collectively bringing us together to do something extraordinary.
I agree.
Do you have
Go on, please.
Do you have like I've been really taken with Bruno Kastrup recently,
yes.
The idealist, who basically argues that, kind of the universe is ultimately consciousness, is ultimately, mental in nature, which is a lot of what the quantum physicists also came to.
Yeah, Kastrup's ideas are extraordinary, and Kastrup, is updating idealism for the 21st century, and his work is also extraordinary. I really would love to get to. Kastrup has quoted me a couple of times, I'm told, but I really would like to meet up with him at some stage, because I think he's one of the guys that's really pushing the envelope.
Would you characterize yourself as an idealist, or how do you see if you were to put your
I think my position is more subtle than that, because I think that I'm probably postmodernist idealist, maybe. The idea that I believe, yes, consciousness is prime, and that consciousness creates everything around us. And this is what I call my egregorial hypothesis, that reality itself is an egregore that we create collectively, and that there is a collective consciousness that we are all part of. I call it I call the collective unconsciousness of humanity, I call the Uber daemon. And then I have a concept I call the Godemon, which is effectively the equivalent of the Or Ein Sof, or the ideas of Sufism, this idea of this something, or as Bill Hicks said, we're one consciousness experiencing itself subjectively. Now over to Bill for the news. and I always love that particular thing. It's just so powerful. And I think this is the way forward. I think the concept of pan-deism rather than panpsychism is also the route. And I contributed a chapter to a book, as did Bernardo Kastrup a few years ago, on panpsychism. So I think Bernardo and I are both panpsychists. If we had to divide ourselves,
if you had to define,
which is that we.
Yeah, what is that?
I'm sorry.
What does that mean? Panpsychism. I don't know.
Panpsychism is that God is the physical world around us.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Okay.
Like God is in the eyes of your
everything
dog.
is embodied of God.
Yeah.
Whereas pandeism is that everything is God, including you. We are all emanations of a conscious life force, and that life force is what, as say, the Kabbalists would call the Or Ein Sof. And if you go into the Gnostic traditions of, for instance, the Sufis, you find a very, very similar concept. And of course, you find it in it's literally the perennial philosophy, isn't it, of Aldous Huxley? Because the perennial philosophy, the basics of all religious belief systems and all philosophical belief systems, is the same singular truth.
Yes.
We are all one singular consciousness. And always say, try and find the God within. And of course, that's what entheogens do, isn't it? You find the God within yourself when you take entheogens. That's literally what the word means. So there's something in here. And I always feel that our group, and I include you guys in this group because we're all working together, there's this kind of a synergy with all of us. We're all tripping on something extraordinary. It's like we all have the pieces of this jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah.
And one day we'll all sit round and we'll go, oh, that piece goes there. Wow, yeah. How did we not see it?
Yeah.
And that's, I think, when humanity moves on.
I know you only have a couple more minutes, Anthony. Tony, do you have any other particular burning questions?
The only other question I had for you was: have you experienced an extraordinary moment of metaphysical nature? You personally, have you had contact with somebody you loved who's passed away? Have you had a voice in your head say "turn right," and then you did, and you figured you saw a truck barreling towards the left and realized you were just saved? Like, anything personal?
Okay, the only really extraordinary experience that I have, I mean, I'm not a terribly spiritual person, unfortunately. All of my friends have these experiences and I don't. But there was an experience I had many years ago. I get synchronicities all the time, and I find them extraordinary. But there was an experience that proved to me that Cheating the Ferryman has validity. And what happened was I was driving along the M62 motorway in the north of England. I was at that time I was divisional human resources manager for a group of private hospitals, and I spent my time troubleshooting all over the place. And it was a particular evening, and it was the deep winter, and I was driving down from the M62, which is the highest motorway in the UK, and it was very foggy and very, very misty. And at the time, I was thinking, God, this is like American Werewolf. I was expecting a sign of the slaughtered lamb to appear in the mist. I'm driving down, and I'm a great music buff. I used to have, I've got now over 20,000 separate musical tracks. And in those days, I had an MP3 player, which had about 16,000 tracks, which I always had on random play, always on random play. So there's 1 in 16,000 chance of a track coming up. As I'm driving down, one track comes up, and it had never played before. And it was a song called Round of Blues by Sean Colvin. Okay. Now, the reason this made me sit up was that 8 or 9 years before, I'd first heard the song, set of circumstances, which I haven't got time to describe now, but I first heard the song and immediately put that down to be my death song. I wanted it played at my funeral.
Wow.
I didn't know why, but I wanted it played at my funeral. Now, roll forward 9 years, going along the road, this song comes on. And I thought, this is significant. I suddenly found my left hand grabbing the car wheel and driving me into the hard shoulder. As I did so, a lorry in front of me shed its load of crash barriers, and they bounced in the road. They would have hit my car. They would have killed me. I sat there and I realized the reason that was my death song was last time I was running through the Bohemian IMAX, through my life, the last thing I remembered before I died was that song playing. And in this new life, my Damon, or whatever it was, made that song come on to make me get out the way.
Holy shit.
That to me proved it. And funnily enough, interestingly enough, Sean Colvin reacted to a couple of my postings yesterday. And I've contacted Sean Colvin to ask her why she wrote the song. So this could be a really interesting set of circumstances
at
the moment.
And
so cool.
Can you explain, because now you've used the concept a few times, and I think it's just going to bounce off most people. What is the Bohmian IMAX?
Very quickly, it's my dig at Daniel Dennett. Daniel Dennett wrote a book called Consciousness Explained a few years ago, which is a real materialist reductionist. You know, Dennett believes that we're not even conscious, we're fooling ourselves into thinking we're conscious. And one of the concepts he put forward there, he called the Cartesian theatre. And it's his model of how the brain works. And I argue that no, it's not a Cartesian theatre. It's much more complex than that. It's a Bohmian IMAX. And in this, I'm referencing the great Anglo-American physicist, David Bohm. And David Bohm had an argument where he called the implicate and explicate orders. And it was David Bohm that first came up with the idea that the universe was a hologram. Very, very interesting man. Fascinating man. Died many, many years ago, but I've interviewed and I knew one of his close friends, a guy called Professor F. David Peake, who was also a quantum physicist.
Oh, yeah, no, Pete.
So that's why I call it the Bohmian IMAX.
Pete wrote a lot of great books. He wrote a book about synchronicity also.
Yeah, it's like this book on synchronicity is amazing. And of course, his associates still run the Parry Center in northern Italy. I was trying to get him a book deal a few years ago as well, which was unfortunate. Yeah. His book on Blackfoot physics as well is well worth reading.
That's a very nice book. So, so the idea is that kind of we are, I guess it goes back to the sort of simulation or kind of virtual super reality idea again, that somehow we're actually just...
It does. Like it's the term I use flippantly, semi-flippantly, for the illusion, the illusionary reality that surrounds us, that's processed by our brain and expended outwards. And I just call that the Bohmian IMAX. So when you fall out of time, when you're in the death state, it's the Bohmian IMAX you go into.
Wow.
Well, I feel we should let you go to your dinner and your young wife who solved your midlife crisis, and don't get her upset. And
then hop in your Corvette, drive off into the sunset.
Cold lamb chops sitting on the plate, and she's angry at you, and you're like, "No, I was explaining the Bohmian IMAX and how the soul exists after death."
And she'll roll her eyes and look up and go, "Oh, God."
This guy. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing your knowledge. This has been a fascinating
Wonderful. Thank you very much. It's been wonderful. Thanks, guys. Thank you very much for allowing me on your show. It's been really enjoyable. We must do it again.
Yeah, let's do it again.
Because we only scraped the surface, unfortunately. Okay, then. Bye-bye.
Have a great
See
night.
you. Bye.